We are on the heels of the second trial of the Karen Read case, and there was a 5-part docuseries that came out about the entire thing, and we're going to talk about that in today's video. Hello, Sofa Squad, and welcome back to the sofa. Sofa's back there somewhere. I'm right here. My name is Paul if you're new to the channel. If you're not new to the channel, well, my name's still Paul. So today, y'all, we're going to be doing a video. This is probably going to be a long one. This is, I'm going to say for me, one of the most requested things that people have asked me my opinion on. I have never offered an opinion on it because I've never looked into it deep enough to form an opinion of it, okay? When I saw this docuseries that was out, I was like, you know what, let me just see what this is about. The second trial's getting ready to start. I pressed play and could not stop watching. Okay. Now, I will say this. If you follow my channel, then you'll know I review documentaries and stuff like that all the time. This one's a little bit unique, my review, in this context. It's very difficult to just look at this docuseries and just review that alone. There's so many moving parts and people to this case. It's one of the craziest I've seen. What I'm saying is when I watched this, I was talking to several of you in DMs and emails about it. I went and looked at parts of the trial and that kind of thing. However, there's a large part of the Sofa Squad here that probably has about as much familiarity with this case as I did, which was like they've heard of it, but you know, all this drama and what's going on, the man in the snow and this and that. So to me, when I watched this, I was like, this docuseries is a good, like, broad stroke over the case, right? And so that's how I'm coming at it with this. Yes, I did form an opinion on whether I think she's guilty, not guilty, this, that, the other, whatever, okay? That being said, am I an expert on the case? Absolutely not. Was I there? Absolutely not. Do I know the people? Absolutely not. There's that. I am literally forming an opinion based on pretty much the docuseries, but also other stuff that I looked into. And then just looking at the things that I have an expectation out of when we're watching these trials and seeing, you know, evidence and things of that nature and kind of the court of public opinion type thing. Okay, so there's that. Before we even get started, y'all, I'm going to Christina Randall the comment section. We're sprinkling Christina Randall energy all over the comment section. Y'all, please be nice. Please be open to other people's opinions. One of the reasons I've never talked about this case here is because of how volatile people get over it. It is a very polarizing case. After watching this, I can understand from the local perspective of why emotions run high with this, right? So I totally get it. But just please, you know, just Christina Randall down there, be nice to everybody, please. We all have different opinions and that kind of thing. So that being said, you have to talk about, before you talk about the documentary, the numerous people involved in this, okay? I've kind of like just reduced it down to Sofa Squad version, but Court TV did a really good like who's who of the scenario. And I want to start off with the most important person. We're going to start off with the victim in the case, John O'Keefe. Okay, so like I said, John's the victim in the case. He grew up in Braintree, Massachusetts. He's lived in Canton since 2014. There he was raising his niece and nephew following his sister and brother-in-law's deaths. We'll get into more of that as we go. Now, to me, John sounded like a real stand-up kind of guy who would go up to bat for those that he loved and cared about. John was dating Karen Read. They've been dating for about 2 years when John died. Now, they didn't live together, but Karen spent most of her time together at his house, right? The Canton home where he lived with the niece and nephew. So one thing that I really admired about John, learning about John, was the whole thing, you know, with the niece and nephew. And we'll talk more in depth about that, obviously. But, you know, I was sitting here thinking, I was like, you know what, for people who have children, like one of your worst fears is, oh my gosh, what if something happened to both of us and whatnot? Well, that nightmare happened, you know, to his family members with the niece and nephew. And they had a John O'Keefe. And he not only did this, he stepped up to the plate with somebody else's kid too, right? So I was like, this man really is a stand-up guy. Like, he sounded like a really amazing person in that context. So I really admired that part of him. Okay, so there was John. Let's talk about a couple of other people. Let's talk about Karen Read. She's a 44-year-old financial analyst from Mansfield, Massachusetts. And she was also an adjunct professor at Bentley University. She stands accused of second-degree murder of her boyfriend, Boston police officer John O'Keefe. Now, this incident occurred back in January of 2022. O'Keefe was found unresponsive outside of the Canton home of another Boston police officer, Brian Albert, during a major snowstorm. Now, prosecutors allege that after like a night of drinking, we're going to talk about all this in a minute, Karen Read strikes O'Keefe with her SUV, leaves the scene. Okay. Now Reed's defense is like, no, that's not what happened at all. Okay. Her defense says that O'Keefe was basically like ambushed inside when he went into Albert's home, and then it was a big cover-up kind of a thing, and he was left to die in the snow, suggesting a cover-up by law enforcement to protect fellow officers. A few things that are brought up during this are the injuries on O'Keefe. They're inconsistent with being hit by a vehicle. These include 2 black eyes, skull fractures, claw-like wounds in his right arm, and possibly from a dog. We'll talk about that too. Now, there's another major bombshell in this, and it's a Google search bombshell that came from Jennifer McCabe's phone. Now, allegedly, this was deleted at 2:27 a.m., and the search term was hose long to die in cold. Now, she misspelled it on there, HOS, but it's obviously supposed to be how long to die in cold. So, again, we're going to talk about all this stuff in a second. But the first trial started off April of 2024. After 10 weeks, y'all, major, it concluded in a mistrial due to a deadlocked jury. They could not reach a unanimous verdict. A retrial is scheduled to begin on April 1st, 2025. Let's talk very quickly about that. We are not going to follow day by day here on the trial or stream it or anything because I'm going to be following Lori Daybell's. However, I will be paying attention to it in the background because I'm very curious now to see what exactly is going to happen with the second trial and how it's going to all go over. Okay, so let's move on to the next person. Let's talk about Michael Proctor. So this is the lead investigator in the case. Okay, now recently they've been doing all these pre-trial motions, right? He was officially terminated from the Massachusetts State Police after it was revealed during the trial that he had sent derogatory and like really unprofessional text messages about Karen Reed. We'll get to those again as we discuss, but they are jaw-dropping. Now, like I said, this case has blown up and created a divide, not only locally, but like nationally at this point, okay? This is where we get to the docuseries. It's titled A Body in the Snow, The Trial of Karen Reed. It premiered on Investigation Discovery in March of 2025, so not that long ago. So, there's that. So, Brian Albert. Brian Albert is the owner of the home in Canton where John O'Keefe was found outside, you know. Brian was a police sergeant. His brothers are Chris Albert and Kevin Albert. Now, Chris, I believe he also serves on the Canton Select Board, and he also owns a pizzeria. Kevin Albert serves in the Canton Police Department as a detective. Now, Albert and his wife, Nicole, they met family and friends out at the Waterfall Bar and Grill in downtown Canton the night of the incident. The timeline we're talking here is January 28th, January 29th, 2022, okay? So they ended up inviting like everybody back, right? They're having a party. One of their kids is having this like a birthday or whatever. It's having a party at the house. They're like, come on back. Snowstorms coming in. You know, everyone's drinking, partying, having a good time, okay? Now, they had not met Karen Reed prior to, and they were like, they only had kind of a handful of interactions with O'Keefe as well. Now, Nicole Albert. Nicole is the wife of Brian. Albert said she did not know that her sister, Jennifer McCabe, we'll talk more about her in a minute, invited Reed and O'Keefe to her house, but they never showed up. Now, Nicole learned of the incident going on after her sister came in the bedroom and told them, okay? And it's noted also that Brian Albert did not come outside to see what was going on even after being told about the incident. We'll get into that more later. So again, setting the scene here. Albert's on the house. There's several Alberts, but Brian Albert is going to be a main name here, okay? Owns the home, right? They're out doing the waterfall. There's something going on at the house. They're inviting people. Their friends, Jennifer, Nicole's sister, hey, you know, Karen, John, y'all come back to the house. This is where we're going. Here's the address. You know, so there's just all this going on, and you've been in scenarios like this before. One of the things that was very interesting to me about this case and watching it is I was like, we've all kind of been in this thing before of like, in some fashion, you know, whether when you're a kid or whatever, you're hanging out, you're doing this, everyone's having a good time. Hey, come on back to the house, right? And how fast things can go wrong, okay? Whether intentional or not intentional. Anyways, we'll get to that. Now, Caitlin Albert, the daughter of Nicole and Brian Albert. Now, she went to the waterfall with them. She would leave a little after midnight, I believe they said, from the family home when her boyfriend picked her up. She also went to high school with the Canton firefighter paramedic Katie McLaughlin, one of the first responders to the 911 call reporting O'Keefe's body. She'll come in later. Kevin Albert, we mentioned him earlier. Brian Albert's brother and a Canton police officer. Okay, now Chris Albert. Chris Albert is one of Brian Albert's 6 siblings. His wife Julie, him and Julie, have given different accounts about whether they attended the after party on that night in question, the 28th, right? 28/29th, however you want to do it. Now, the defense claims that the couple participated in a meeting at the Fairview Road home. That's the address, 34 Fairview, the morning John O'Keefe's body was discovered. Now, they suggested this was like part of the cover-up, right? They also point to Chris Albert's connection to the lead investigator, Michael Proctor. We talked about him earlier. Through like family ties, they cite, I think it was like Facebook photos, and they show the Alberts and with Proctor's relatives. Now, Chris admitted that they were at the Waterfall Bar and Grill and followed Brian Albert to his house, and he even told a grand jury that they left without entering. Now, prosecutors also argue in this that the couple has faced like tons of threats, harassment due to all of these allegations, right? Including like protest and fake orders targeting Chris's pizza business. Multiple members of the family would talk about the level of like retaliation they got from the public about this. If you're asking why they got that, well, we'll get to that in a minute. Okay. Julie Albert is the wife of Chris Albert and the sister-in-law to Brian Albert. She's been portrayed by the defense as a significant connection between the Albert family and the family of the lead investigator, Michael Proctor. She allegedly like attended the Proctor's sister's wedding, has like babysat her children. On the night of January 28th, Julie was at the Waterfall Bar and Grill and said that she followed Brian Albert to his home, though it's not clear if she went inside or not or whatever. I don't know. She also told a grand jury that she went straight home and did not attend the after party. Now, Julie claims she first learned of John's death the next morning when she visited the Albert residence to deliver a birthday cake and realized she had missed a 5 a.m. call from Jennifer McCabe. During hearing, Reed's attorney cited a text allegedly sent by Proctor's sister 2 days after O'Keefe's death, stating that Julie wanted to give Proctor a gift when all this is over. Now, another message from Proctor reportedly mentioned Julie babysitting his child shortly before the incident. Now, prosecutors confirmed that Julie occasionally helped with child care from Proctor's sister, but they denied any kind of like improper relationship. And it was also noted that Julie has like as well like faced threats and harassment and all this kind of stuff. Okay. Now, this is a name you're going to want to remember as we talk about it. Jennifer McCabe. This is the sister-in-law to Brian Albert and the wife of Matthew McCabe. Jennifer knew John O'Keefe, the victim, through her daughter. Jennifer and her husband Matthew were at the Waterfall Bar and Grill that night and invited O'Keefe and Karen back to the Alberts, okay? Remember earlier we said that they were like, oh, we didn't even know that she invited him, right? So she texts John the address, tells him where to park, but will say that she saw Karen's car arrive but never saw them get out or enter the home. And then the car leaves. Now, around 4:53 a.m., Karen calls Jennifer from O'Keefe's niece's phone looking for John, okay? Reed and McCabe will drive over with Reed's friend Carrie Roberts to the Albert home. They get there around 6 a.m. They find John's body in the snow. Jennifer is the one who allegedly made that Google search we talked about earlier at 2:27 a.m. that hose long to die in the cold or whatever. However, as we will learn, the timing and reasoning of this will be an issue during the trial. The big takeaway from this is you're going to want to remember Jennifer's name, okay? Obviously Brian Albert, because that's there. Obviously Karen Reed, obviously John O'Keefe. Jennifer and Michael Proctor are going to be two major names that are going to come up, because one thing that I saw in watching the Docuseries versus even scratching the surface of this case like I've done is there's a lot of names and connections that the Docuseries does not go into. They give you more context into how something could go down south for a proper investigation. One thing you will see, and you're probably already putting this together because I know this is a lot of, well, they're sisters, friends, brothers, twice removed. Everyone on like this thing is connected, okay? Like they all know each other, right? In some fashion. And so it could be more casual, but nonetheless. We'll also get to another case that is going to be coming up to the federal court systems that involves the same force, okay? And it paints a lot more context. That's it for now. Let's keep getting to these names. Brian Higgins is going to be another major name you want to know. Brian Higgins, a close friend of Brian Albert. Brian Higgins is like a federal FTA agent. He also has like an office with the Canton Police Department. He was present at both the Waterfall Bar and at the after party at the Albert home on the night of John O'Keefe's deaths. Higgins had like this budding I don't even know if you call it romantic connection with Karen. I don't know what you call it. This started before all this, obviously. And essentially what's going on is Karen and him are heavily flirting with each other via text and whatnot. They will eventually kiss and have like a moment or something like that. But just keep in mind that these text messages, which he will read on the stand, we'll get to that. And I mean, you want to crawl under the table. Under the table. Far under it. It is so embarrassing. Secondhand embarrassment. If you put yourself in their shoes, like you had to do that. Oh my gosh, right? It's not that clear how much they interacted at the bar that night. However, he did text her this, I think it was like, okay, or hello, or something like that, when she got there, right? Because I think she's flirting with him and all this, and then she shows up at the bar with her man, and he's there too. Now, keep this in mind. This is a huge part of the basis of what could have potentially allegedly happened at the house, right? Now, initially, Higgins told investigators that he didn't really speak to anyone after leaving the party, but a federal investigation suggested otherwise. Okay. Around 2 a.m., Higgins and Brian Albert, the owner of the home, exchanged missed calls. They both later dismissed as like that was like an accident or whatever. Higgins also said he ignored a call from the former Canton Police Chief Kenneth Berkowitz that morning and only learned of O'Keefe's death later from Brian Albert. Another thing you're going to want to keep in mind as we learn about this is butt dials. These people are inflicted with butt dials, okay? Like bizarre times to be just constantly butt dialing each other when you lay the timeline out. And for people who are like, oh, I didn't do this. And it's like, well, this is kind of weird. Like, why did this happen? And all of this will add into as well these two words that you need to keep into your mind as we look over this. Reasonable doubt. Okay. So that is a huge part of this case and will be a huge part going into the second trial. And it is a huge reason why she wasn't convicted in the first one. Let's keep going. Okay, then we have Julie Nagel. This is a friend of Brian Albert Jr. Brian Albert Jr. is obviously the son of Brian Albert. He was having a birthday party. So remember how I said earlier, like they had something going on at the house or whatever? Well, this is the situation, okay? So she attended his birthday party at the Albert residence. Now, she was going to leave and she called her brother for a ride. He comes, she talks to him for a minute, and then she decides like she's going to stay longer or whatever. So when she stepped outside to inform her brother, she noticed Karen Reed's car, she'll say, but didn't witness like any commotion or see anyone getting out or anything weird going on. Now, she would eventually leave the party with the McCabe's around 1:30 a.m. Now, Ryan Nagel, that's the brother of Julie, he said that he received a phone call from his sister that night asking for a ride from the Albert home. A friend drove him to Fairview Road, 34 Fairview, remember that, and they arrived the same time as a black SUV similar to Karen Reed's. He said he chose not to go inside. His sister like invited him or whatever, but he's like, I'm not going to go in. So he leaves shortly thereafter. Now, as he was leaving, he says that he glances into the SUV and he saw a white woman alone in the driver's seat. He told the police there wasn't like any kind of signs of like an argument or weird activity happening in or around the vehicle. Now let's go back to Michael Proctor, okay? Oh my gosh. Michael Proctor is I should say, a Massachusetts State Police trooper. He became the lead investigator in the John O'Keefe's, situation, murders, or whatever you want to call it, his death, after he and his partner arrived at the Albert home on the morning of January 29th, 2022. They took over from local police due to the jurisdiction and potential conflicts involving Brian Albert's connection to Canton detectives. Now, Karen Reed's defense argues that Proctor's ties to the Alberts and McCabe's created a serious conflict of interest. They're claiming that these relationships led to bias in the investigation. They would reference like Facebook photos and show Proctor's family with members of the Albert family as evidence, amongst other things. Now, one photo reportedly includes Chris Albert and his son Colin with Proctor's mother and sister, while another shows it's like a wedding picture and it shows like Colin and Proctor alongside, I think, Proctor's sister, the bride. Now, the Proctor's family attorney has downplayed these connections, of course, right? And they're just like, Julie Albert, the wife of Chris Albert, was friends with Proctor's sister and attended the wedding with her son. So the prosecution maintains that these connections, they're like distance, they don't compromise the investigation. It's, a big nothing burger, as people like to say. Elizabeth Proctor is the wife of Trooper Michael Proctor. She becomes the point of interest in the case when Karen Reed's defense sought access to her phone records. Now, this followed social media posts by Reed supporters showing Jennifer McCabe's car parked outside the Proctor residence in September of 2023. Now, the prosecutors stated that Elizabeth and McCabe met to like basically give each other support over all the harassment that they had been getting due to their involvement in the case. And they also emphasized that Mike Proctor wasn't present during any of these meetings. So Colin Albert, this is the 17-year-old son of Chris and Julie Albert and the nephew of Brian Albert. Now, he was at his cousin Brian Jr.'s birthday party on the night of John O'Keefe's death. Now, according to the state, he leaves the house shortly before the group returned to the bar. Now, the defense will claim that he left around like 12:30 a.m., I think. And the defense has cited these old photos. I think one was from like a 2012 wedding and another from a 2016 something or other wedding or whatever. And they're using this to suggest ties between the Alberts and the Proctor family, okay? Now, one image reportedly shows Colin as a child with Michael Proctor and his sister, the bride. Now, a Proctor family attorney clarified that Colin's and Julie Albert's sister was friends with Proctor's sister. I can't even figure that. Okay, do with that what you will. Which is how Colin and his mother were invited. Okay. Prosecutors say Colin has since faced, online threats, harassment, you name it. Now, these were also brought on by a blogger that linked him to O'Keefe's death. Now, Keith Berkowitz, he served as Camden's police chief until he resigned back in 2022. He contacted Brian Higgins after John O'Keefe's body was discovered. Now, about a week after the incident, investigators reported that Berkowitz, while passing by the Albert residence, came across a fragment of red plastic believed to match the broken taillight from Karen Reed's vehicle. Okay. Now, Aidan Kearney. This is a blogger who operates under the name Turtle Boy. Very vocal supporter of Karen Reed. He's used his website and social media to promote, all like basically his viewpoints on what took place in the cover up and all that kind of stuff, okay? Now, 2023, he led a protest. It brought demonstrators to like the homes of people connected to the investigation and whatnot. He posts videos of himself leaving voicemails and, just reaching out, doing all this kind of stuff, okay? Well, this would end up leading to him getting charged with several counts of like witness intimidation, some of which have been dismissed, others seem to still be on the table, right? Obviously, you can imagine why the state wouldn't like him, as well as like other bloggers and whatnot, because a lot of times they can get down and dirty the way other journalists can, and pull out information, this, that, and the other. And we'll get to this too a little bit, but they'll allege that Karen is like giving him information to leak and doing this and doing that. So just know that when we start talking Turtle Boy, because at first I was like, this is like, what is Turtle Boy? What is Turtle Boy? That is the dude's nickname, okay? So when we talk about that, that's what we're talking about. Now that you're thoroughly like, what kind of family tree did we just go over? Again, key people here. Obviously the most important, John O'Keefe, the victim. Karen Reed on trial, Michael Proctor, Jennifer McCabe, Brian Albert. I'm not saying other people aren't as important, but these are some of the names that focused on the storyline that the docuseries presents. And speaking of the docuseries, let's now go ahead and get into it. Now, if you have followed me for a while, you'll know how I do these. I literally will sit, my phone's right here. I'll sit with my phone and make notes as I go. So when I talk, I'm literally just making notes and commentary from the perspective that they are showing me the docuseries. So if I change from this person's story to this person's story, it's just how it's presented to me. We will stop and talk along the way because I've got a lot to say, and if I try and do it at the end, I'm just not gonna lie, y'all, I'm old, I'm gonna forget. Okay, let's just call it what it is. Okay, call it what it is. So let's start from the top. A Body in the Snow is the name of it. The Trial of Karen Reed, episode 1. Okay, buckle up. Okay, so it starts off with an interview of Karen, and they ask her directly, did you hit John with your car? She says no. And they're like, could it have been an accident? And Karen says, 0 chance it was an accident, 0 chance John was not hit by a vehicle, okay, period. Now, Karen says she hates answering that question because she knows how much she's scrutinized over it, and she's like, if I do this, if I blink, if I do this, it's all ripped apart, right? I mean, I get what she's saying. Karen is also interviewed and introduces herself and, talks about like basically the before and after of this case. She's the middle child of a brother and sister. Her mom always said that Karen, had brought fun into the family and the household. She seemed to me like a very just vivacious, very big personality always, right? And on that note, let's just stop for a minute and say this. One thing that I see when I look at comment sections or commentary on it, whatever, Karen is a very polarizing person. People either love or hate her, believe her or don't. She just has that type of thing. And so I was explaining this to Matt. It's one of the many reasons why this case is so volatile. I was like, pretend that she wasn't involved in this at all, right? Like it's just somebody you randomly met. I was like, her personality is so big and like just, she's just that kind of energy that you're either going to love or hate her. I just think she's that type person, right? And so that is like the palette for what we're seeing, because if people believe her, like the Free Karen Reed movement, they love her, right? Obviously the people who don't believe her can't stand her. Okay, so it's so interesting, the comment sections on any video you watch, because it's just like, oh my gosh. Anyways, so she just has this huge personality, okay? Now she says that her and John, they dated like shy of 2 years. One of John's friends talks about growing up with him and their friendship. John came from like a family of 5. He was very generous, funny, loyal family man. Others speak very highly of him too. They say, they always knew he was going to be a cop. His friends and family, it was like, they were in this, they wore the badge, all this kind of stuff. He was going to fall in line with that, right? It gives me goosebumps, bless his heart. Now, also people would take his badge number, and obviously this became a big symbolic nature of his memory and whatnot, okay? Now, remember how earlier I said that he was like raising his niece and nephew? Well, they obviously go over this in the docuseries. John would take his niece and nephew after his sister dies, and then, literally soon after, not long, his brother-in-law dies too. This is the part where I was like, what? I was like, I cannot imagine. Thank God he was there to take them in, because if you follow true crime like we've done here for years, you know what it's like when kids end up going in the system. And I sit there and think for the kids, I'm like, imagine both your parents losing your parent. And if you did not have a family member, a solid family member to take you in, and then like you go from whatever life you had with them to being thrust into the system. So John was that man to step up and make that happen for them. And I really admire that about him. Now, Karen says they met in 2004 through an old high school friend. They basically like lose touch for a while. And then during the start of the pandemic, Karen's like, I'm bored, whatever, let me get on Facebook. So John had basically sent out all these messages, and she was kind of making it sound like, I guess, like to a bunch of like ex-girlfriends or something, like, I don't know. But Karen basically eventually replies, right? Now, she says he loved to laugh. He loved his family. He loved kids. She described him as this all-around amazing dude. Now, John's high school friend says prior to his death, all of the friends like Karen, they were totally cool with her, right? Now, in an interview, the documentary person asked Karen why she's doing this documentary. And Karen says this is like her testifying, or like being able to say what happened to her, right? Without being on the stand, right? So another form of testifying. She says she knows what happened with her and John and what was said and not said. And she wants to just say what happened. And then she does. So January 28th, 2022, Friday, Karen says that her and John argued that morning. She says that most of the arguments were about his kids and how basically he thought that she spoiled them. And it sounds like there was some tumultuousness going on there, because it sounded like she was kind of like the fun person. My take is that Karen was very motivated. She made a lot of money. And so she was somebody who would come in, like do stuff with the kids and whatnot. And like I heard one comment about like, oh, when she comes over the kids, hug her first, or things of this nature, whatever. It will also be alleged, I want to go ahead and say this now, that it was like he was trying to break up with her and that things were going bad and blah, 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 blah. Things were definitely rocky leading up to this, and this will be part of like the states, this is how we arrived here type situation, okay? So nonetheless, they were arguing that morning. She's like, I gotta get out of here. Remember, she has her house, but she stays over at his house a lot. So she goes back to her house and she works remotely from the home. Now, remember, at the same time, major snowstorm coming in, okay? They're like, everybody brace for it, okay? And so she's sitting here and she's like, you know what? Even though I was mad, I was like, I still kind of want to be at the house with John and the kids, right? Like having fun and like being around my people. So around 6 p.m. she calls her dad and she's like checking in. She's just talking to him about what's going on. And her dad's like, honey, why don't you just stay home and, just don't go over there. And Karen's like, wow, if I'd only listened to my dad, none of this would have happened, okay? Now, I want to pause here and say something too. And now some of these things, when I give my opinion, it's like my experience. I am 100% aware that my experience doesn't define other people's, okay? So it's just me making commentary about, you know what, I can relate. When she was doing the thing about, I'm mad at him, but I still want to be over there. I completely related to what she was saying. I was like, I get that. Like, where you're like, you know what? I've cooled off. I'm away. You know, I miss my people that I'm around. And even though I'm still kind of upset about A, B, or C, whatever it is, like, I want to be over there, right? One thing that I also found with Karen, like I said, she's a polarizing person. There's a very relatable part to her with things like this that she'll talk about. She's a very open book feeling in many of these moments in the docuseries. Now, again, I don't know her, right? It could be all fake. I don't know, right? But there are several things where I was like, I get what she's talking about, okay? Now, I have questions about other things as well, and we'll get to those as we go, but yeah, I just wanted to say that before I forget. Let's keep going. Now, 8:35 p.m., Karen leaves home. 8:51, Karen meets John at C.F. McCarthy's. At 10:54, they go next door to the waterfall, the place we've been talking about. Karen says at the waterfall they meet Jennifer and Matthew McCabe. Remember the names earlier. Now, it sounded to me like Jennifer coached John's niece's basketball team, so there was some connection going on there. Now, also at this place there at the waterfall, there's Brian and Nicole Albert. Okay, remember, owner of the house. There's also Brian Higgins. Remember, Brian and Karen had been flirting, right? Karen says the previous weekend was when she met the Alberts for the first time. Now it's getting late. Jen invites them to the Alberts. Karen says she's all for John blowing off steam. You know, she's like, he's always full of steam, you know, so she's like, yeah, sure, let's go. Now remember, this is late. And also keep in mind, like, these people, like, some of them didn't really know Karen. Some of them just barely met. So there's this energy of, like, we're going over to kind of, not strangers, but, like, these aren't your people. Like, you don't know them like that, right? Sounds to me like they were all drinking at the bar, and it's like, yeah, come on over, you know, like, I love you, come on over too, like that type thing, right? And she's like, oh, yeah, please, you know, John, like, he's, you know, whatever, he needs to just, like, let's let him go, okay? So she says everyone was at some level intoxicated, okay? Now they'll do this and they'll get into, like, the science of it and whatnot, and I think I have it down later when we get to that or whatever, but they were definitely drinking, okay? So that was part of it. So Karen drives, John gets on the phone with Jen, and he tells her the address. He's like, we're going to 34 Fairview Road. They get there, and Karen says it's dark. It doesn't look like anything's really going on. And she's like, okay, like, what's up? She's like, will you make sure that we're, you know, really welcome here? You know, he's like, yeah, let me run in and just double check. I'll come back out or call you or whatever, right? So Karen says that when John gets out of the car, Brian Albert's house, he took her full vodka soda that she had with him. I guess she had it from the bar, so he takes this glass, whatever it was. Now, she says that she sees him go up the driveway, and he makes it to, like, what she's calling, like, the side front door. She sees him open the door and walk in. And so Karen's like waiting, but there's no John. So then Karen gets a little bit irritated after a few minutes, and she calls and there's no answer. And she's like, what the, you know what? So 10 minutes go by and she's like ticked. So she just leaves, okay? Then we hear the voicemails, okay? And Karen is going off on this man, y'all. She'll call him, text him all night long. She's like, you effing loser, you know, and like, who are you effing over there? Blah, 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 blah. And she'll say that this is the last time that, well, the last time she ever told him was when he got out of the car, Brian Alberts, right? So she's convinced that he's like cheating or doing something. Now, after that, through the documentary, we'll hear a news report. John is found face up dead in the snow at the house around 6 a.m. Friends, family, devastated, right? Now, they talk about the first hearing and what happened in those reports that Karen had hit him with her car. We'll then hear about, you know, Karen walking out of jail, bonding out, and Karen will say that 3 days after he died, she was arrested. And they had already seized her phone prior to that. She was charged with vehicular homicide. Then we will get to meet Karen's lawyer, Danny Yannetti. Now, he gives his credentials, and Alan Jackson, not the country singer, and Liza Little are other attorneys who are brought in. Alan will say that he looks at the autopsy photos and that he doesn't believe John was hit by a car. And yes, we will get in more into this or whatever, because one of the things, like with the way the cookie crumbled in this case, is the oddness of his injuries lining up with the car, right? But we'll get into that. Now, Karen talks about how confusing it was the next day and how she's like questioning herself with like the what ifs. And she's like, could I have done it? Could I have like been unaware that I hit him? Then we'll see a massive turnout for John Service. I mean, this man was loved and respected and missed, okay? Tons of servicemen and women. I mean, you name it, right? They showed out for this man. Now, Karen said that she didn't go to John's funeral because there was a stay away order in place for her to stay away from family, etc., right? Then there's another bombshell. Okay, Karen will get arrested again, right? The prosecution brought the case to a state grand jury and presented evidence for second-degree murder. And an indictment was sent. They go back and they arrest her, and they'll show this, right, of them going back to the house, the body cam footage, and she's just like, what? Like, what? Are you serious? Kind of a thing. And now it's gone from like an accident type vibe to, oh, she knew what she was doing. Okay, so this is where we'll see the camera footage of her arrest, and she's like basically like in her pajamas, and she's asking for like different clothes and meds, and she's like, I don't want to be seen on the news with how I look, and you know, all this kind of stuff. Then we see the cops talking, and they're like, you know, saying like, see how crazy she is, and you know, she cares more about what she looks like on TV and this type of stuff. Now we'll get way more into that with Michael Proctor's comments and whatnot. Then we hear from an attorney, and he talks about a call from a guy named Mike, and he's saying that maybe somebody else caused John's death, and we're not talking about Mike Proctor. And they say you need to look into the occupants of 34 Fairview. That's Brian Albert's house. This shifts her defense from an accident, because apparently that's like what they're going to do first, is be like, this is an accident, whatever, to John was beaten inside of 34 Fairview and dumped outside, and Karen is being framed. Now, we're going to get into a lot of those names now. Brian Albert, the owner of the home. Brian Higgins, he's there too. Now, her, meaning Karen's attorneys, talk about the importance of data in this case, and it will be, right? The state does an extraction of Jennifer McCabe's phone. She is one of the people that suggested John come to the house. They find a search in Jen's phone. This is the one we talked about earlier. Hose long to die in the cold. It was searched January 29th at 2:27 a.m. Bam, the first thing ends. So episode 2. Karen will talk about the extraction report from Jen McCabe's phone. Karen shows how her search was deleted by the user. So then we'll hear from Karen's lawyers, and like, we have to find out with that search if it was really at the time it was, because also there was 2 more searches like later that morning of the same thing. We'll get more into what the evidence shows with that here in a little bit. But Karen's lawyer says that the media really didn't pick up her story at first, right? And then we're introduced to a man named Aiden, aka Turtle Boy. Now, he will help to blow up Karen's case to the public, okay? The state will allege that the defense is basically taking like little bits and pieces of the case and leaking it out to Turtle Boy. Karen will say that she eventually is talking to Turtle Boy about the case almost every day. And then the case will cause a strong divide. People are either for Karen or for the cops. There's like no in between, right? And the attorneys will also talk about how there is corruption and that the community is absolutely sick of it. So that's like a huge backdrop, okay, to like all the stuff going on. Now, this part is not mentioned in the docuseries, but it needs to be talked about, and this is something you can go Google and look up. Sandra Birchmore. This is a huge, huge case, right? And it's getting ready to go, I think it's like a federal case. So she was 23 years old. She was found dead by the Canton Police Department. That's all I'm going to say about it here. Look it up and your mouth will be on the floor, okay? And it will help you get more context as to some of the local thoughts and feelings on this stuff, right? So that being said, that's a whole other video that I will probably endeavor down, but it's worth mentioning here. But again, they don't mention it in this docuseries, so I don't want to go too deep into it here. Let's keep going. Now, April 16th, 2024, jury selection begins. A jury is finally seated, and we see the defense working on an opening statement. One thing to keep in mind with the way this docuseries is done is, if you are familiar with Michael Peterson's The Staircase, where he allowed like cameras into this like high profile trial or whatever. Yeah, it's just the updated situation with this, right? But it's Karen Reed this time and John O'Keefe. Very similar to that is what you're seeing. They're showing how this process works. Okay, so we get to the opening statements, right? Now, Karen will say that she felt like the state's opening was rambling. They threw out tons of witnesses. It just was like blah. The defense opening was strong. It was that she was framed, that she didn't do it, which means that someone else did. And then he'll go into like the corruption, the department, all this type of stuff, the people who lived in the house, the corruption, all that type of stuff, right? Now, Jennifer McCabe takes the stand. She is a major witness, okay? And even Karen says it's basically her or Jen that's going down. One thing you have to keep in mind is just what Karen said. Karen's sitting here saying, I didn't do this. My man walked into that house and turned up dead in the front yard hours later, okay? So you do the math and you tell me what's going down. So if these people now who are in the house are coming out talking about, we didn't see this, we didn't see that, well, it's me or them, okay? So that's the energy going on. Now, Jen, very volatile on the stand. If you watch part of this, and it's funny because if you are watching this Jen, not this Jen, but another Jen who I've been talking to about the case, thank you for all the information on it. She was like, one of the things you need to watch is Jen McCabe's testimony. So definitely if you're going to kind of go pick stuff from the first trial to watch, definitely watch that. I watched the defense questioning her and it's interesting. Now remember, Jen is the one who's like officially like, hey, y'all come back to, Brian's house, blah, 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 blah. And again, remember, they don't really know him that well, but they go, and this is like the first time going to the house, right? They get there. Jen says, she looks out the window. She sees Karen's vehicle parked in the street in front of the residence. And she says like she looks out the storm door and sees the car and texts them. And I think this is like 12:31. And she's like, pull behind my car or whatever, the driveway. John doesn't respond. At 12:40, she texts again saying like, hello. And she can't tell if they're still out front or if they left. Now, Jen says at that point that she really doesn't think much of it. Like maybe they left, maybe they got into an argument, like who knows? And so then Jen says that she goes home around 1:30 or 1:45. Now, Karen says that when she left there, like the house, she was mad at John. She keeps calling him. And again, we hear these messages. She's cussing him out. And Karen says that she was drinking. She was mad, but she thought he was sleeping with another woman. Now, back in the courtroom, we learned that Karen makes 53 to 55 calls to John's phone, okay? So you can only imagine how they're going to paint this out. Like, she's this obsessive woman, you just scorned, oh, this and that, she's drinking, she's going off, she's doing that. I don't know any of them. Maybe she is. I don't know, right? Now, I will say this, in situations that I have been in when I thought back, because one thing I saw people coming up like, why would she just leave? Why would she just leave? Again, it's just my own experience, okay? It doesn't paint the picture for anything. Yo, I have been that person when I was younger, okay? I was so, like, deflated of self-esteem and self-worth that in this kind of situation, if I thought that my man had gone in and was talking to somebody else and didn't respond to me, and I was so afraid of confrontation, I would have done the same thing as Karen and have done something similar in that situation. Of, well, I guess I'll just go. He'll get up with me when he gets up with me, right? It doesn't make it right, wrong, or indifferent. Now, mind you, I'm talking like I was like early 20s on this, okay? Like really young, right? I wasn't a grown adult, but it's here nor there. What I'm saying is, again, with this part of it, I was like, I can relate to that. And I, through my lens, if it's true, if that's really what happened, I was like, yeah, to me, that's just somebody who has very low self-esteem because that was my experience. It doesn't make it the Bible, right? Let's keep going. Now, Karen says, she leaves, she goes back to John's house. She sleeps on the couch, like waiting for him to come in. She says she wakes up at a certain point real early morning. He's still not home. And now she's like, what the, what? She calls him at like 4:38, something like that. Obviously doesn't answer. She starts calling his friends and everything like, what's up? So she calls Jen McCabe at 4:53. Okay. Jen is like, Karen is screaming, Jen, 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 like going off, okay? Jen's like, oh my God, what's going on? And then she's talking about, we got in a fight. I left him at the waterfall. And Jen's like, Karen, we saw you outside at the house. And then Jen says that Karen says she doesn't remember going there. And then Karen is yelling like, did I hit him? Did I hit him? So you can imagine this is very damning, right? Now, again, there's two trains of thoughts here because Karen's defense is basically saying this was a cover-up by these people in the house. So of course they would sit here and say this kind of stuff right here, right? Now, if you're of the ilk that she's 100% guilty or whatever, then clearly this would look like she's trying to cover up what she did, okay? So anyways, there's numerous phone calls made that morning. And John's friend says not one was made to 911. And if there had been, he might be alive. And I thought this was an interesting point, regardless of where you fall on the Richter scale of things of like, and that's one of the things that I thought like, yeah, why wouldn't somebody call 911 at that point? To be like, I think, something's up, right? So then Karen will say that Jen says, "You're hysterical. Look, come get me. Come pick me up. I'll come look for John with you." Okay. And Karen says at the same time, she's calling this other person, Carrie, right? Now on the stand, Carrie says that she gets this call from Karen at like 5 a.m. saying, "John's dead. John's dead." She hangs up and then calls back later and says she's afraid John might be dead. He might have gotten hit by a plow. Karen tells Carrie to come over to Jen's and they can all go look for him. Okay, so they all go back to John's. They meet up, they go back to John's house, okay, to make sure he's like not there or whatever. On the stand, Carrie will say that Karen makes mention when they get there about her taillight. Carrie says that Karen is like, "Do you think I hit him?" And she's like, "No, you hit something, but probably not him." So obviously they don't find him at Karen's, right? No spoiler alert there. And they're like, "Okay, we have to go back to 34 Fairview. Brian's house." Jen says on the way, Karen's screaming their name. She's like, "Oh my God, oh my God." And Jen on the stand is just like, "Shut up, Karen." Okay, just like, oh my gosh, right? She's yelling like, "Did I hit him? Did I hit him?" And Carrie's telling her shut up, and it's just this whole scene in the car, okay? Now, Karen says as soon as they start getting to the house, she's like, "There's John. There's John. He's right there." And the women, meaning Jen and Carrie, they're like, "What are you talking about? Where?" And she's like, "Stop the car. Stop the car." And Jen and Carrie on stand will say they don't see anything, okay? So they watch her get out, like car still going practically, right? She runs to a mound of snow, they will say, and it's like, "Here's John," right? Now John's friend will question, of course, the obvious thing, right? How does Karen know that's where his body is? Okay. Now Karen says that when she gets to John, his mouth is open. He had a piece of glass wedged in his nose. She pulls it out and blood gushes. One eye is split open. She tries mouth to mouth. She can hear gurgling. Karen and Carrie squabble over moving his body. On the stand, Jen says Karen is screaming, "Is he dead? Is he dead?" Karen calls 911. We see the body cam footage. Karen's running around. She's screaming. She's doing this. Da 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 da. Okay. Now on the stand, Jen will testify that Karen will tell the cops 3 times that she hit him. Okay. First responders will also testify that Karen tells them that she hit him numerous times. Now remember earlier I talked about the connections of how this person knows the first responder who's there, blah, 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 blah. So depending on the lens that you're looking through, if you were looking at through her defense, you're seeing the connection. Like, well, of course the first responder said that because they know blank. They have the whatever, right? It just depends how you view it, right? If you were not viewing it from that, you're looking at this like, oh, she's so guilty because she did blah, 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 blah. Okay. There's that. Now, they will show how many drinks Jen had that night. This part was a little bit confusing because it was like, they say like she had 9 drinks, right? And Karen's like, that's not true because some drinks were counted numerous times. And she's talking about the shots and all this kind of stuff. And she's like, it was more like 6. Now, I'm going to say that, okay. Yeah, 6 or 9 is a lot. Okay, now, everybody is different. So the same way I said my experience doesn't define somebody else. So I rarely drink at this stage in life. I'm not a fuddy-duddy. I did all that when I was younger, okay? At this point, we're just trying to get through the day. So for me at this point, to have one, if I had one, this isn't a mixed drink, but pretend it is, okay? If I had one mixed drink and we're hanging out, I'd be like, oh my God, I don't know what I'm doing. Where am I? Y'all, it could have been a Zima, okay? And I'd be on the floor, okay? I'd be swinging my boxers around my head, okay? So Karen might drink way more and 6 drinks doesn't affect her. It's you know how that goes. Everybody's different. So regardless, the defense will pick apart people on the scene who say that she said she hit him, okay? Karen talks about all the people she calls, and her dad is one of them. She tells him she doesn't want to live, she's like, whatever. Now, while she's doing this, the dad's calling, I don't know who, this is actively going on, right? They end up doing a psych hold on Karen, okay? Now, her dad will come back to get her. Her dad ends up being the one to officially tell her, yeah, John is dead, girl, okay? Now, they leave, and Karen says that she wants to go to the house and see the kids. They go there, John's family is there. And his brother says, John looks like he went talking about, his body or whatever. He's like, he looks like he went 5 rounds with Tyson. And then the mom's like, he looks like he got hit by a car. He looks like he got hit by a car. Now, at some point, someone there, I can't remember who, I think it's a guy named Paul, the brother or somebody, gets a call. And Karen's like, he goes into another room. And when he comes back out, the vibe is completely different, okay? And they are coming at her in this way like she killed their loved one, like John, right? She's like, they're coming at me in this very guilty manner, and it is a bad vibe completely. Okay, now, that's episode 2. Let's move on to episode 3. So episode 3, we see the war room, okay? Now, apparently this is just where the attorneys and Karen essentially live, right? And they're preparing the trial and their defense and everything. Now, they're talking about evidence and how some evidence wasn't booked until March, so it was like missing for a bit. Now, a reporter says it was snowing, which probably slowed things down. And at first it wasn't considered a homicide, so like this would make sense, right? Then we see a video of an investigator using a leaf blower to blow snow. They find what looks like blood pieces, like snow with blood and stuff like that, or whatever, and also pieces of a cocktail glass. They secure the glass, but then they'll put these blood droplets into red Solo cups, which literally shocks everybody. The cups were then placed into I think a shop and save bag or something like that, or some kind of grocery bag, right? And if I remember correctly, it's that they went to the neighbor or something and got the Solo cups. I can't remember. Help me out in the comment section. Regardless, people's mouth is kind of on the floor, like, you put that kind of evidence in like a contaminated, like, are you kidding me, right? Michael Proctor. Okay, remember, the primary investigator on the case. So, one of John's shoes is missing, which makes them think it's a hit and run, because this is apparently a common thing, like during hit and runs or getting hit by a car, like your shoes will get knocked off your body, right? Now, investigator says that when they go to Karen's parents' home, they see her Lexus and it has damage done to its right rear taillight. The investigator says that they asked Karen if she saw John go into the house, and she says no, and that she made a 3-point turn and then left. Now, as far as the damage goes to her car, she says, I don't know, it happened last night, like something, right? She kind of plays it off, whatever. Well, they end up seizing her car and her phone. Then we hear about CERT team's search, shoulder to shoulder search. They will say that they found multiple pieces of a taillight material in this area. They find his sneaker, John's sneaker, buried in the snow, and they found more taillight pieces after that. They would also say they found tiny fragments of taillight in John's clothing. Now, Karen says she has no memory of hitting him, she has no memory of breaking her taillight, and that her memory isn't as sharp when she drinks. Like, there is that dynamic to it, she will admit, okay? Now, Karen will then walk us through ring camera footage of John's where she backs into his car pulling out of the driveway, and very clearly you can see that there would be like damage, like where she's backing into, this could completely be where she damaged that taillight, okay? Now, police will say, well, there was no pieces of taillights at that scene though. Now, the theory is, you know, based on if you haven't put this together, that there was something very shady done with the pieces of the taillight and they were placed to the crime scene to set her up, okay? So they're saying that the first search with a leaf blower, like, was really like nothing or whatever, but then they don't really find these things. But then the CERT team searches later after the car is in possession, like at the cops, and they find taillight pieces at the scene. Okay, so do the math on that. Now, again, back to Michael Proctor, lead investigator who's since been fired. Over the next 2 weeks, would go back out to the crime scene and find 40-some pieces of taillight, something like that. Now, they show a video of the Sally Port where Karen's car is being held. And one thing is, it's hard to explain, but like they'll say the video is backwards, so it's almost like pretend it was like this, but it was like this, right? They're trying to basically establish, like, did Mike Proctor even have time to potentially do anything shady? Because the state's like, he didn't even have any time, or Well, they show this video, and they show Mike walking around to the back of the taillight area where he is out of camera and you can't tell what he's doing. And so it's like, again, they're showing there was your moment. He could have done this. It is possible, right? So a lot of the stuff that the state will present, the defense is able to go and shoot it down. Okay, now they talk about how Karen's courtroom behavior is absolutely scrutinized. We see this in case after case after case where we watch, I mean, we do it here at the Sofa Squad, where you're like, why are they smirking? Why are they doing this? Why are they doing that? I mean, I get guilty, not guilty, whatever. This is a very tricky dynamic if you're on trial, okay? Now, next thing they'll talk about is, again, like about how John allegedly never came into the house. Remember, at the house, it's Brian, Nicole Albert, daughter Caitlin, son Brian Albert Jr., some of his friends who are over for the birthday party or whatever. Okay. Also, Jennifer McCabe and Matt McCabe and Brian Higgins are there. Now, all the witnesses will say on the stand that John never came to the house, right? Like, they'll get up there one after the other talking about, I never saw him, I never saw him, I never saw him. Now, the defense will say, well, he could have come in and been ushered downstairs. Like, nobody would know, right? So again, there's this level of maybe some of these people who say they didn't see him, they wouldn't necessarily have seen him. I will say this, and this is one question that I had in this that I have not explored down yet, but that if you watch this is one of the things where they miss. My next thing was, okay, they never bring out in trial, apparently, the layout of the home, okay? Because I guess the defense doesn't have to prove that, just reasonable doubt and whatnot, okay? So my question was, well, yeah, this house apparently, like, if you're going in, could you go into a part of the house and go down to the basement and nobody see you? One thing that will come up, and I want to say it now because I'm not sure if I made note of this or not, but his watch or whatever it is would show a bunch of activity, like going up and down stairs or something like weird like that, like right at this time, okay? So I find that very curious. Now, just keep that in mind as we go forward with that. So everybody's getting up there. We never saw him. But again, would you even have saw him? No. A criminal defense attorney, like they have, talking heads come into the docuseries and whatnot, says if she came back that morning like she did and having seen John go into the house the night before, then she would have been like, well, what happened? He went into the house. Who did this? And I thought that was a good point to bring up because it is kind of like, okay, well, why wouldn't you say that? Like, why wouldn't that be a question of like, what happened? I watched him go in the house and now he's dead out front. But again, part of me is, I'm kind of answering my own questions. She's also saying, well, I have bad memory. I have this or that or whatever, right? But it is a question to be brought up. It's brought up also how all these people leave the house that night, but no one sees John's body laying in the lawn. However, okay, his body is on the opposite side of the property. It's dark, it's snowing, it's cold. It would be hard to see. Just me looking at it, I was like, oh, I could place. Like, no, especially drinking all that kind of stuff. Where it was at, I don't think people would have seen it, especially when people, when it started snowing and whatnot. Julie, who we mentioned in the beginning, a friend of Brian Jr.'s, who was at the party that night, says on the stand that Jennifer offered to drive her home around 1:45 a.m. She says that she saw a black blob-like thing on the ground near the flagpole. And this is where the body was found, right? Julie's brother had come to the house earlier at the same time Karen arrived. He didn't see anyone exit the vehicle, nor did he see anybody go into the residence. Now, the brother arrived. They come over to pick her up. They talk for a minute. She goes back and she comes back out. She decides to stay longer, whatever, okay? The brother drives by Karen's car. He sees a woman on the driver's side. Hands 10 and 2, nothing out of the ordinary. The theory is, where else could he have been but inside the house, right? We're talking about John's body at this point, or John himself, whatever. Brian Albert takes the stand as well. Now, he is asked where he was at 6:03 a.m. on January 29th, and he's like, I was sleeping in my room. Now, the defense is like, so you have all these women in your driveway, cops, and one of them screaming at the top of her lungs, talking about all the crazy stuff, Karen's doing whatever, right? And they're like, you're unaware of this? And he's like, no, me and Nicole slept through it. And, another person counteracts, like, there's a big snowstorm going on, the wind, all this, whatever. Okay, so there's that, okay? So even if you, cancel those two things out, once he's awakened, he still doesn't come out of the house to help. There's that. Now, I want to pause there and just say this because I'm afraid I'll forget it. We're going to get into what I think personally with Karen at the very end of it. This is a case where what contributed to the deadlock jury is there's multiple things that are true at one time with this, right? And I think that you have multiple people with multiple motivations doing multiple things, okay, that may or may not be related to the situation at hand of John and Karen, but because of all these moving parts and other levels of maybe shadiness, it creates this overall thing of reasonable doubt. Okay, so just keep that in mind and we'll get to this more, because again, as I've looked through this, I'm like, yeah, you know what? I think action, let's say action ABC over here, while shady, might not be directly related to action DEF, but regardless, you can't be doing ABC because it's going to still make DEF look bad. You know what I mean? I know that sounds confusing, but it is what it is. Let's keep going. Here we go. So no investigator ever came out of the house to investigate. There's just this kind of whatever. So then they get into the arm injuries. Okay. They're discussed as to how they look like they could be dog marks, like dog bites from a dog attack, okay? The Alberts have a big German Shepherd dog. I want to go ahead and say this now. They will get rid of the dog and rehome said dog after all this happens. So there's that. Dr. Maria Russell says the marks are consistent with a large dog attack. She says that she ruled out a car strike like right away, but the state will say, well, she's just getting paid to say this. Now, another expert did DNA testing and they found no dog DNA, but they did come up with pig DNA. Now, they were like, he could have ate a pork product or whatever, this could, be the reason. But then other people brought up the notion of it could also be like maybe a pork rind or a dog, treat or something like that. So again, all these conflicting things. Now, the defense says he wants access to the dog, right? But the Alberts are like, yeah, so we got rid of that dog a few months after the incident. And they'll be like, look, and they refer to the dog as it a lot of the times. And they're like, it was involved in a dog fight, so they got rid of it. Okay. Now, John's brother will say it makes no sense to put John's body in the yard if you just attacked him in your house. Okay. I agree. Okay. On that level of things, I'm like, yeah, that part I question that. Like, why would you do that? Why not take the body and move it down the street more? Why not do this? Why not do that? Again, we'll get into all the theories at the end, but that was the question that I had as well. Now, they will talk about the extreme harassment that the witnesses and their kids have received. Okay, the kids are on the stand crying, right, and all this type of stuff. Now, again, it depends on how you view them. Think Brian Laundrie, if you haven't watched this, his parents and whatnot, where most people are upset with them, but, they're like, we received all this harassment. Well, a lot of people view it like they took part in the crime, right? So that's how a lot of people view the people like Jennifer McCabe, and all these people of, you were part of the crime. You're not a victim in any way, okay? Okay, now, next, Brian Higgins takes the stand. Now, if you don't have your sofa seatbelt buckled up, immediately buckle it up right now because this is so full of cringe, y'all. It's painful. They start showing all these text messages of Karen texting him first, it seems. She's talking about like he's hot and whatnot, and he's replying back to her. He's flirting back as well. And when Karen and John arrived at the bar that night, this is when Brian Higgins texts Karen. He's like, hello. Now, all the text messages show this extreme flirtation between the two of them. They eventually share a kiss, and definitely spicy text message affairs going on. Karen says that this was on the heels of a trip to Aruba. Karen says in this trip there's lots of alcohol, and a scene is described where Karen sees John hugging a woman and basically goes off. It turns out that this woman is just like a friend, and I can't remember the exact dynamic, but it's like someone in the situation of another person whose kid he stepped up to the plate for, right? So it's like, not just like a friend, but like it's that kind of vibe or whatever. So Karen describes like going off, and it was like this whole thing, okay? This is on the heels of that. Now, more text messages are shown from the day of the event of John and Karen arguing via Facebook Messenger. Now, all this being said, the defense is saying that Brian Higgins has motive to want to harm John O'Keefe. Almost, just do the math on that, right? Like two, dudes, woman in the middle of it. There you go. Brian Albert and Brian Higgins has said that like no one spoke after the party, right? We talked about this earlier. They're like, nobody talked after the party broke up or whatever, but there is evidence of them calling one another like at 2:22 a.m. or something like that. Like one calls one and it misses, and the other call, if something like there's very short phone calls or something like that, right? But they'll be like, oh, that was butt dialing. Now, Jennifer McCabe, during a 10-minute period, calls John O'Keefe's phone numerous times before 1 a.m. She says that these are butt dials. They don't have a chance to go to voicemail. The defense says that when John was getting beat up, this is what their excuse is, or like their story for that is, when John's getting beat up, he drops his phone, and Jen calling it over and over, is them trying to find it because it will ultimately be found underneath John's body. Then there's this whole thing where they're like, you know what, we want to look at, Brian Higgins' phone, okay? Like, we want to look at some of these people's phones. Just guess what happened. He's like, oh no, I got rid of it. So right before he was supposed to turn this in or something, right? So he's like, yeah, I don't have that anymore. I got a new one. I threw the other one away. And he's like, I either cut up or broke the SIM card. And he said he did this because basically it sounded like his cover or something was blown as an ATF agent. So he throws the phone away in a military base that he was passing by. And he did this the day before he was going to be given formal notice to not destroy his phone. Okay, now let's pause for a second. This is a prime example of what I'm talking about when I say I think multiple things are going on in this case. Multiple things can be true at one time. Then they talk about the extraction from Jennifer McCabe's cell phone. That Google search we've talked so much about, the not hose, but you know what I'm saying, like how long to die in the cold, okay? But it was misspelled. So Jen says that she did the text at the request of Karen Reed when they came back to the house later that morning. Now the records will show around 6:24 a.m. the same search was done a few times. It also appears that she deleted the search at 2:27 a.m. Now other experts will say that the timestamp is associated with when the tab is open, not the actual search. Okay, now then the feds began investigating the ones investigating and prosecuting Karen Reed, okay? Michael Proctor takes the stand. Now, this is major in this, okay? He is very connected with the Albert family and it's an extreme conflict of interest, okay? Now, Proctor has to testify about the unprofessional text about Karen Reed. These were between him and colleagues and some high school friends and other things or whatever, right? Now, they talk about how hot she is, but that she doesn't have an ass, and that he calls her a whack job CUNT, okay? Now, this is 16 hours into the investigation. Now, here's one thing, in watching the docuseries, I did not watch this live or whatever, the defense will continually be talking to him using the C word, the one that you refer to as the whack job C word. And it's just it's so effective because that is such a foul word, especially when talking about a woman, obviously. So to use it in such a place like a courtroom from someone who is of the stature and who he is, his position or his former position, I should say, you can imagine the vibe that creates. Whoa, okay. So he also will make a joke about not finding any nudes on her phone yet. Now, another one he texted that he hoped Karen would just unalive herself. You already know how bad this looks, okay, y'all? So now let's get to the finale, okay? Finally, if you're still here, episode 5. Now, Trooper Paul takes a stand. Okay, now, poor little Trooper Paul. Okay, it honestly would be the way I would be, right? He's super nervous. He speaks very fast. He sounds very unsure of himself. He is the crash reconstruction person or whatever, right? The black box in the car will show that she backed up at 24 miles per hour for a certain amount of feet, okay, and then stops, whatever. Now, Trooper Paul will say that the victim, John, got hit in the arm, then projected him backwards, which caused the head injuries. One thing to keep in mind with this case when you're looking at it is and I don't even know how he would say it, but the oddity of his injuries, they don't make sense. Now, granted, this is, in death or murder or accidents, do things make sense all the time? No, they don't. But it contributes, in my opinion, my unprofessional opinion, to the deadline that was reached in the first trial, okay? Now, on cross-examination, the defense will bring out from Trooper Paul that he only has an associate's degree and really no higher education to be doing crash reconstruction stuff, right? The defense will bring in professional crash reconstruction experts, very polished, advanced degrees, you name it, etc., right? They'll say that the tail light damage is inconsistent with striking his arm. Now, the brother has a theory of John holding the cocktail glass, Karen hitting him. He basically rounds out and eventually falls and hits his head. We'll talk about that in a minute. The medical examiner says the head injury and hypothermia basically ultimately led to his death, but they will say that the manner of death was undetermined, okay? Again, that's going to play very heavy into what really happened. Now, the state on cross with a crash reconstruction man will bring out that there is DNA on the taillight of John's DNA and that the crash guys were not aware of that when they made this like big fancy thing or whatever, okay? The DNA shows that John's DNA is around that area on the taillight. It's on the cocktail glass. And there's also like a single hair consistent with John's on the back passenger side near the taillight. Now the defense says, of course John's DNA is all over her car. Like, you know, they were dating, they were, you know, whatever. Of course it's going to be. And then next they'll be like, and also on that note, how did one little tiny hair stay on the car while being towed in a snowstorm to the Sally Port that fast, that far? You know, riddle me that. Now, huge major thing. A plow driver, the dude who comes by and that does the snow or whatever, who plowed that road, takes a stand in front of that house that he did, right? The regular guy, right, that does this or whatever. He drives by the house at 2:30 a.m. and I think Brian is this dude's name. There's a lot of Brians in this case. And he says, no, I didn't see anything at 2:30 a.m. There was no body in the yard. I didn't see that. And I would have saw it, kind of a thing, right? So you know plays, right? This was major. Okay, so closing argument. The defense is good, okay? He's charismatic, like he's very dramatic, he's charismatic, he tells a story, he does this, right? The state isn't as poised, you know, he runs out of time. There's all these complications with it, right? Okay, so the jury is 6 women, 6 men. The first question from the jurors that will come back after hours, whatever, is about the search report. But they're like, we can't, you know, sorry. Now the second note that comes back, the jury's like, hi judge, yeah, we got a little issue going on back here in the jury room. Yeah, we cannot come to a unanimous verdict. We would like to leave, please. Thank you. Can we get a little to-go bag? And they're like, no. Judge is like, no, go try again, right? So eventually they're just like, look, we cannot do it, okay? And a mistrial is finally called. Now you can imagine both sides are very emotional over this. The jury would basically go back there and say they were deadlocked on like the middle. So there's like the 3 charges, right? There's like the second-degree murder, then there's leaving the scene of a crash, and then there's like a vehicular homicide or the middle charge, whatever. It was the middle charge that they were kind of tossing up, but they were deadlocked on, okay, which I thought was interesting. Now, and we'll get to that in a second. So that being said, the second trial is coming up in April. There has been a new prosecutor assigned. Mike Proctor, like I've said, he was fired. The O'Keefe family has filed a civil suit against Karen. Now, as today that I'm recording this, Karen is in court doing pre-trial motion hearings and all this stuff. So by the time you see this, there will be multiple updates. This isn't, again, a video necessarily meant to be like, here's all the latest, greatest. This is an overview of the case, because when I watch this, we'll now get into some of my closing thoughts, what I think of Karen, the theories and whatnot. When I watched the 5-part docuseries, I was riveted, y'all. I was sucked into it, okay? And I definitely went back and forth. I was like, episode 1, I'm like, she didn't do it. Episode 2, I think she did it. Episode 3, I don't know. So let's cut the chase, right? Do I think Karen is guilty? This is how I will say it. If I was on the jury, I could not have convicted her on these charges. My reason being was this. Even from what I saw, and again, like I said earlier, you know, I haven't watched the trial from start to finish. So again, this is non-professional, sofa sidebar, you know, kind of vibes going on here, right? What I saw was that the defense presented enough reasonable doubt for several things that I was like, yeah, huge part for me was the injuries, okay? I was like, they're saying they're not consistent with the wreck, and it does seem like, where did these things come from on his arm? You know, I don't get that. There wasn't enough of it being said to me. Did I question some of Karen's behavior? Absolutely. Absolutely. Did I question some of the police's and the people at the house and all that behavior? Absolutely. Okay. And this is what I'm talking about when I say multiple things are going on at one time. Because what could be happening here, and let's kind of segue into some of the theories, right? So there's a few different things going on here. Let's say this. Let's start off with, they got in an argument. Karen was mad. She intentionally backs up to him, does what the black buck says. She kicks in the reverse. She hits him, realizes she does it. He gets thrown back, hits his head, and whatever. He dies out. She goes home. She starts a massive cover-up. She's calling. She's doing this. She's doing all the things, right? I do not think that that happened, okay? I don't, even like if I'm going down the rabbit hole of like she's did it in some fashion, whether it's an accident or whatever, I don't think that that took place. So, and why do I think that? There's something about the injuries that they have told me aren't lining up with that. I can't visualize it. I can't put it there. And it could just be like, nope, this is just one of those 1 in a billion situations where this one car hit was just odd and not like other ones. And hey, you know, there's that. I ain't no professional, right? Let's talk about the next theory. It's an accident. They get there. Karen's doing whatever. She backs up. She hits him. Let's say she's mad. She kicks him in reverse and hits him. And it's like, oh my God. There's two versions of that. Oh my God, I hit him. What do? I freaked out. She leaves the scene. She goes home. She starts covering up. Or she hits him, doesn't realize she hit him because she's drunk. And then it's like, and then what we see is really what happened, where she's like, where are you? What's going on? And then, yeah, she goes home, she comes back, she does this, she does that. I would still question all the people above's behaviors, like I said. Then let's go into, she didn't do it all. Let's get into, he goes, she's like, you go in. Now remember, Brian Higgins is there, okay? Now, again, you help me out in the comments, because my assumption, and from what I know, is that she knows he's in the house. She might be like, I don't, I'm kind of like getting caught crosshairs here. Now, Karen will say in the docuseries, she's like, with Brian, I was like, look, John and I are dating, like, we're not locked in like that or whatever. So, and we got in the big fight in Aruba, and then I maybe retaliated by talking to him or whatever. Who knows, okay? Regardless, it's awkward. So let's say she's like, go catch the vibe. He goes in, he walks in. There's a couple of theories that I've heard. Number one, he goes in and some interaction takes place. Some like, hey, come downstairs here for a second, John, look at this. And immediately some fight happens. It takes place and it's, he's injured, right? Now, there's a couple of things where maybe that did take place and he like tries to go back out of the car and he falls and hits his head on the way and dies. One thing I've seen people say is, well, hey, how did he still have the glass on him? I question this too. Another thing is he goes in, the dog attacks him, right? Somehow the dog gets in, causes these things. Maybe he hits the dog and, they're like, hey, don't do that. And they get in a fight. There's a bazillion scenarios you can come up with. One of the kids' names was implicated in it. I don't want to go into that here because, whatever. And that maybe he did this because he has this history or whatever, okay? There's numerous scenarios there with it. The reason why I'm like, I could not convict is because they threw, and I'll say this, the defense threw enough at the table of possibility to where I was like, yeah, we don't 100% know. And then when you're telling me, riddle me who was Googling how long for someone to die in the cold at 2:30 in the morning, regardless if we can prove when it was done or never, the bell has been rung. And even though both sides kind of make sense to me on that, also the getting rid of the phones. Now, I've also heard, they didn't talk about this in the docuseries, but I think in the trial from start to finish they redid their basement floor. They sold the house soon after. It took a loss on it. Like all this stuff that's like, why did you up and do all that? Right? That's kind of weird. Getting rid of your phones, that's kind of weird. Right? So there was enough there to where I was like, And then let's get into all the highly inappropriate text messages from Michael Proctor to these other people and this, that, and the other, When I say that several things can be true at one time, somebody could be like an annoying person, but that doesn't make them a killer. Somebody could be a nice person and that makes them a killer, right? I think one thing that was going on here is that, again, and if you look at Sandra Birchmore, look this up. Obviously, we see from like the text messages, this, that, and the other, these people, Brian Higgins, people, they had something to hide. Now, whether that was related to Karen, we'll never know, right? But when you're getting rid of your phones and stuff like that, at that level, there's something going on you don't want people to know. All that being said, my whole take on it is I'm just like, yeah, you know what? Maybe she did do it on purpose or whatever, but unfortunately, because so many things were happening at one time, it makes her credibility go away, okay? And go down the drain. So for me personally, I would not have been able to convict on those charges. I could see why the jury was going back and forth over the accident, because to me, and this is what I asked myself too, is I was like, at minimum, I could see this being kind of like an accident, like a drunken accident. She did this, whether she knew about it or not, we'll never know. If she didn't know about it and left, well then could you really charge her was leaving an accident because maybe she didn't know, right? It's like undetermined. But then I sit here and I'm like, but the whole way the injuries were didn't make sense to me. It wasn't sold well enough to me to show me a car injury, right? Now again, part of me wondered this. What if John walked away from the car with her, whatever, stumbles, hits his head, and dies in the yard? And, you know, who knows? What if he got mad and threw his glass at the thing? It breaks, gets on him. He goes and falls in the yard. There's so many things going on, right? There's also so many coincidences. The dynamic of like them butt dialing his phone over and over and over. I mean, you know, hello. So what I think took place ultimately is that, again, several things were happening at one time, and it all muddied the water, and then no one will ever know. On her secondary trial, which is coming up if they don't do anything, whatever, I'm very curious to see what information comes forth. If the state can see where they went wrong, which both sides should be able to see what worked, what didn't, I do not believe that the jurors went for conspiracy. Like there's some major, huge cop conspiracy. It definitely had its moment, but I'm not sure if they did. Now, if you watch this start to finish, you tell me, because I guess to me, and I don't know what I watched that leads me to think that the jurors didn't buy that. I could be wrong. And again, if you've researched this case in depth, let me know. I'm curious to see it in the comment section. To me, they were looking at it like it was possibly an accident, but there just wasn't enough there to give that conviction. And some of them were like, I can't do it. And also, again, if you look into the history of the police department, where it's like, look, they already went through this where they did massive cover-up, so it's in the realm of possibility. One of the things, and when I say locally, I have not been there, but just the way this is portrayed through the docuseries and then what I've seen and talking to some of you, it seems like this truly has divided the area, guilt or not guilt, whatever. We will see what happens in the second trial, and again, if they are able to answer some of those questions to state, then maybe they'll get a conviction on that middle charge, on that, you know, whatever it was, manslaughter or homicide, whatever. I don't know. I'd be very curious to see if they even could get the second-degree murder charge. I think they would have to come up with a lot more evidence, and I think they're going to really have to hone in on the injuries. The injuries, the fact that the ME is like, yeah, it's kind of undetermined, like I don't really know how he died, and yeah, hypothermia and this, but it's, you know, it's not really consistent with a car hit. I mean, that speaks volumes to me, right? There was also some things, now that I'm thinking about it, with the professional crash people. Again, remember, the defense is paying these people, right? So that's a huge part of it. I mean, people are going to say what you want them to say, but the fact that they were so polished and could come in there. Now, mind you, it did come out where they're like, oh yeah, we didn't have this information or whatever, but they were like, yeah, this didn't look like a car crash at all. And the fact that the state's version of it, little trooper Paul, bless his heart, was unprepared for this. These are huge key elements. You need to be able to tell me, for the most part, and really sell it to me with no reasonable doubt, what that car most likely did and what those injuries came from and did. And they weren't able to do that enough for me to convict. So that being said, I am dying to hear your opinion on what you think. Now, again, I will close this out with this. Remember, I have not studied this case. This is based on the docuseries and some little bit of just looking at different parts of it. This is an overview of what to expect from this upcoming trial, like the gist of the story, if you will, okay? So this is one of those cases that a lot of people who follow me, we're going to be following the Lori Daybell thing. If we weren't, we would probably be following this at this point because I am so invested in it. So that being said, let me know what you think down in the comment section below. If you're still watching, this is a long video. I do thank you for it. And when you are down in that comment section, if you could drop some little sofas off for Roscoe and Spirit, Bo and Luke, and the rest of the Sofa Squad, so we'll have a place to sit and converse and Sofa Squad and do all that kind of stuff. And until we all meander our way on down there to do all that stuff, I'll see y'all soon. I just wanted to say thank you again for watching the whole video, and also thank you for being part of the Sofa Squad. Special thanks to all the Patreon members, channel members from both of my channels, everybody who likes, shares, subscribes, comments in the comment sections. It helps the channel out so much. Now, don't forget, I do have that other channel, the podcast channel. That's where we go live, we hang out, we talk. We have kind of sort of a schedule, but just be sure and check it out. I'll put it up here on the screen. And then, like I said in the beginning of the video, if you want to follow me and Ross on the Instagram, go on, check it out. It's right here on the screen again. But once again, thank you very much. I really appreciate you being part of the Sofa Squad, and I'll see you in the next video.